It's bigger than biotech.
Hi, Mr. Atul. It is a pleasure having you on the podcast, and I really appreciate you for taking some of your time to be here with us.
Thank you for having me, Hriday.
Perfect. So let's just get right into our first question. It is for students who only hear about USP on a label. What does USP actually do behind the scenes, and how does that translate into real world quality and trust?
We do a lot of things. We first of all, it stands for United States Pharmacopeia Convention. We have been around since 1820. Uh, it's 206th year of existence for USP. So USP was founded by 11 physicians back in 1820 when people would literally sell snake oil and they would produce things in their homes and go out and sell them on the streets, claiming to have therapeutic benefits and so on. And who knows what happened to the people who used those products. So 11 physicians got together in Washington, D.C., and they decided that we should actually create a book which provides the best practices and the correct ways of manufacturing some of these products. And that's how the first pharmacopoeia was born. We have been a volunteer driven organization out and out. And in fact, we did not have a single paid employee till about 1950 or 1960. We have, of course, changed along the way and we have grown with the world and the pharmaceutical industry. And FDA was created somewhere down the line, and we have remained independent of government, but we have also remained a nonprofit since. We are the only pharmacopoeia that is not a part of the national government in this world. What we do is one of the fundamental things that we do is we create standards. Say a drug product goes out of patent, right? Or when it is just about to go out of patent, there is going to be a number of generics manufacturers who are going to want to manufacture it. So, what is the best way to do that? If it is important for public health, USP creates a monograph which details the manufacturing nuances, what should be the limit of certain impurity, what you should be looking out for, so on and so forth. We do not dictate how it should be made, what process should be used, continuous or batch, what equipment you should be using, what analytical equipment should be used. We do not do that, but we care about the quality aspects of the product that is manufactured. So we create those monographs after a lot of work, a lot of volunteers from various walks of the industry. It can be regulators, it can be industry scientists, it can be academics, it can also be equipment manufacturers. They all get together, they volunteer their time for USP. They serve on our expert committees and panels, and that is how those monographs are created after years of painstaking work. So that is one of the things that we do. We work in outside of pharmaceuticals also in nutritional products, and you would see USP label on many vitamins that are sold in Target. So that is
Right.
because we validate them.
Okay. Understood. Wow, that is quite a rich history that USP has, and of course, it's one of the global standards for most drugs on the market. You have USP formulations for drugs, and it is quite impressive that it just started off as a volunteering society and it has grown so much. So it's great to see our organization has evolved through that process, and we will get into the supplements aspect of it because I know there's a big regulatory sort of issue there where there's supplements on the market that have not been validated for a certain level of quality. So, of course, we'll get into that later. It's a big issue. But for now, I wanted to dig deeper into what your work is at USP. I know you've written a lot about continuous manufacturing. Firstly, what is continuous manufacturing and why is it such a big deal?
So continuous manufacturing, in some ways, some people would say it's a misnomer in the pharma world, but it has been around for over 100 years. And when you have large volume production in oil and gas industry or chemicals industry, people figured out how to run those processes 24/7, 365, lights on or lights off, continuously, and assure quality of the product coming out. In the pharma world, it is trickier. It is harder to do that because the quality specifications that the pharma industry has to go with are very, very stringent. So imagine the product going into your car versus product going into your body. It's a big difference in the quality standards that need to be maintained. So it was not easy for the pharmaceutical world to switch to continuous manufacturing, whether it was for large volume or smaller volume products. But over the years, the last 20 to 30 years, there have been significant developments, some of which I had the privilege of being a part of in the early part of my postgraduate work. And so some of those developments, whether it was the equipment, whether it was the models, the process analytical technologies, the multivariate statistical models, all of those combined to enable manufacturing in continuous or semi-continuous. So continuous, again, people think that continuous means it is going to be 24/7, 365 forever, but not in the pharma world, because you do need to stop. You only have approval to run for so long before you want to check your process parameters, your product quality, etc. We stop, we have to clean equipment, we have to validate that cleaning, we have to put everything together, and we restart. So there is a lot of nuances. So essentially, the difference between batch and continuous manufacturing largely is that in batch, you start with a certain amount of raw material. You put it into one unit operation. The unit operation could be, say, mixing. Let's, for very simplicity's sake, we think about we have API or active pharmaceutical ingredient in powder form. We mix it with one or more excipient, which carries that, protects it, or it is a part of the formulation. And so the first step could be that you mix all of them together. So in a batch, you could be mixing, thousands of kilos of these material together. And you establish that process, you make sure that the mixing is of good quality, and then you stop. You can take samples, you can send them off for analysis. Once you get an okay, you move to the next step. It could be granulation, it could be milling, it could be tableting, then you go to the next step, it could be coating. But at every step, your entire amount of material kind of moves together. And in the end, you define a batch using that. This was material that was worked together on so-and-so date in so-and-so facility, and we create a batch out of it. But in continuous, imagine you have much smaller equipment, and instead of having a big blender in which you put thousands of kilos of material, you have a horizontal cylinder with an impeller blade, and you have material continuously coming in and it's continuously exiting out after getting mixed. And it happens to maybe one or more unit operations. You can have granulation in continuous, you can have drying in continuous, you can have tableting in continuous. Tableting is always continuous anyway because we use tablet presses. They continuously keep rotating and producing, tablets. Then you can have coating in continuous as well. Now, people have this misconception that everything has to be continuous for a process to be considered a continuous manufacturing process. It is not so. It's not necessary. In fact, I was a part of the ICHQ 13 guideline expert working group, and what we arrived at was that as long as there is at least 2 unit operations that are connected together and they're working in a continuous mode, you can consider that process as a continuous manufacturing process, even though there are stoppages later now in the downstream. So there are several benefits to continuous. I guess that might be your next question.
Yeah, it's absolutely on point. So yeah, like again, you answered my question about the misconceptions, and again, even one of my misconceptions was like it's all continuous. There's no stoppage in the process, and you cleared that up very well. Because again, that goes into then quality testing. How do you test for quality when the batch is or when there's continuous manufacturing, there are no batches, right? So how do you test for quality? But again, if the process is being stopped or only a small part of the process is continuous and the rest can be fragmented. So again, IP, QA, QC is possible. IP, QA meaning in process quality assurance and quality checks are possible. So that's perfect. And so going on to the next question, again, like you said, what are the advantages? Why should someone move over to continuous manufacturing? And were there any problems with batch production to begin with?
Before I answer that, you said something which raised an alarm. You said there are no batches in continuous. That actually is not true. There are more than one ways of defining a batch. When a product is made using continuous, you can define a batch using a time duration that I ran this process within control from X amount of time to X amount of time. The material that was collected and transformed into product is considered a batch. And then I stopped, right? And when I restart, it would most likely be a different run, right? So it's a different batch. You have to track the material because you have to keep track of what was made using what raw material batches, what process conditions, and all of that data is collected. And it's a world of big data. It's a world of AI. You have to collect everything. You have to make sure everything goes in a batch record, and you split the batches. It makes it easier to track them. So there are still batches. The manufacturing mode may not be batch, but you still define batches. Okay. Now, why would anybody want to go continuous? Now, the answer and the benefits. So the answer is different depending on who you ask and what condition they're working in, what market they are in. So there are several possible benefits for someone who's making an API using synthetic chemistry. There are certain chemistries or reactions that work better in continuous. There may be some that will not work at all in batch. Your yields may not be sufficient, so you cannot economically create or run that process. So that is like the feasibility reason that it is just not feasible in batch. There's more and more complex medicines being produced, newer reactions are being tried. So it can be possible that you may not be able to do a process if you don't run it in continuous mode. And second, maybe you can run both the reactions in batch and continuous, but the continuous gives you faster product. The yields may be higher. You may have more control on the reactor temperature, on the pressure, on the conditions. So maybe you're able to do it better in continuous. So that is for the API maker. For the drug product maker who's starting from powder material and converting it into a tablet. And I talk in solid oral world because that's what I know. I'm not knowledgeable about biologics, so I do not venture into that. The drug product side of things, there's several benefits to going continuous because with newer equipment, you're handling smaller amount of material at a given time. You have a lot of process analytical equipment that is looking into the material. So for example, you have a feeder. You usually have more than one feeders because you're feeding API, you're feeding excipient 1, excipient 2. There can be 5 to 6 excipients. You have precise control on time-wise feeding these because the equipment is just so good. You have loss in weight screw feeders that can very precisely feed each material. You have control over what is going into the process. So that's the first step. You have essentially controlled your formulation. Then scaling up is very, very easy because you can just run it for 8 hours instead of 4 hours, and you've created a bigger batch. Whereas in batch, you put everything together in one go. So you really have difficulty in scaling up and scaling down. Sometimes the equipment will not allow you to, you cannot fill your blender more than X amount. You cannot put less than X amount into this particular blender. It's a part of the design. I mean, it's not qualified for running that. But here you have established your process. If you have established your process sufficiently that, I can run it for up to 32 hours, I have regulatory approval, then I have the freedom to run it for 8 hours or 16 hours. You have this flexibility. Third, it is shown to be faster to get regulatory approval. So if you have a blockbuster drug, and even if you go to market 6 or 8 months early, the difference can be in billions of dollars. So the time and money that is invested in the equipment and facility is minuscule compared to the benefits to the company. And then you think about the benefits to the patient. With stringent quality control, the manufacturer is able to provide higher quality product to the patient. And I'm not saying that the quality difference between batch and continuous is stark, but the manufacturer has control over the process because they are seeing into the process continuously. So there is a more confidence for both the manufacturer as well as the regulator. And the product goes to the market sooner means that the patient benefits sooner. So there are benefits all around.
Those are absolutely very important. I really like your point about the different batch sizes, especially in continuous manufacturing, or at least in batch manufacturing. I know they have to bring different capacity of the same equipment because certain batch sizes cannot, there are limitations to that. Certain batch sizes cannot be made in a big blender versus you need a specific smaller blender for a smaller batch size. So I really like that point. And course, a lot of cost savings come with continuous manufacturing. But one more thing I wanted to point out was your role specifically requires you to balance a lot of innovation with repeatability and a lot of compliance, you know. So how do you balance all that?
It's not necessarily that at USP, because at USP we do not produce products. We are not a manufacturing company. What we do is we create guidelines and we try to help the manufacturers who are not quite there yet with the knowledge side of things, and as well as regulators in certain other countries who are developing. So what we produce are general chapters other than monographs, which are product specific. We produce general chapters that talk about techniques, for example, near infrared spectroscopy or Raman spectroscopy, and various other techniques. We also produce technical guides that talk in general about continuous manufacturing or other advanced manufacturing technologies and how a manufacturer with no background can take small steps one at a time by learning these and eventually step into the world of advanced manufacturing. Because we know that sooner or later, the generics manufacturers, they already are, many of them already are, will have to step into advanced manufacturing, whether it is continuous manufacturing or 3D printing, because a lot of these products that are currently on the market, many of them are made in continuous modes. And when they go generic, the generics manufacturers will have to figure out a way to create an equivalent product.
Absolutely. So actually, I just wanted to clarify my question a bit more. My question was more about, as someone working in a regulatory body where you're standardizing processes, right? In your work, you're not just doing the science, you're again standardizing and helping standardize processes. So in that case, how do you balance the innovation versus the repeatability and compliance? You know, you don't want to you don't want to take something down a notch when it doesn't need to be, or take something up a notch when the world might not be ready for it yet. So how do you balance all that when you're standardizing a process?
So again, I think the phrase is a misnomer. You don't standardize processes because you don't want to stifle innovation. You're not gonna tell somebody that you put one near infrared sensor here and downstream you have to put a Raman and then you have to do QNMR. No, you don't necessarily do that because that flexibility is essential for economic production of quality pharmaceuticals. Our mission is to encourage quality products and their accessibility throughout the world. So, one part of USP looks at the processes in a great scientific detail, and we come up with uh, very stringent limits on, this impurity should not be beyond X%. It could be 1%, 2%, 3%. Now, you're saying regulations. So we do not necessarily set a regulation. We do not enforce a regulation. We create those documents. Many of those are enforced by the FDA and other regulatory bodies across the world. So it is their job, their privilege to enforce them, and it's their decision to do that. We do get help from them while creating those standards. Sometimes we get requests from them that you should look at this and create a standard. Sometimes we get requests to revise a certain standard. So that is one part of USP, which is developing these compendial standards. But we do also see innovation happening. Every 5 years, we have a reset of our expert committees. We invite new people to apply for volunteer roles. And we just had a reset a few months ago. So we have started a new 5-year cycle now. So our previous cycle was 2020 to 2025. Now we are starting a new one from now to 2030. So we get fresh ideas with these fresh volunteers. They also bring in their domain knowledge. And we are able to keep up with the changing world because we have continuously changing expert body. Other than that, we do our own research. We read a lot. I read a lot. That's because you cannot stay competitive in this world unless you continuously educate yourself.
That is absolutely very great advice. I know eventually I was going to ask you for advice, and you already gave great piece of advice about continuously updating yourself. And it's really nice to see that USP also constantly reevaluates itself and updates itself to meet the standards of a evolving world, which is great to see. But now looking more into, or let's do some time traveling back to your university days when you did your PhD. You did a PhD in mechanical engineering and later pursued an MBA. So what triggered the shift from deep technical training towards more of a business leadership sort of path?
Yeah, so MBA just happened recently, just a couple of years ago. The PhD happened almost 20 years ago. So the PhD was in mechanical engineering, because that has been my background from my bachelor's and master's. But I became interdisciplinary very early in my master's days. I started looking at biological systems, proteins that could unfold in a certain way, and I started comparing them to our robotic arms in the physical big world, macroscopic world, and started looking at computational methods of analyzing them, and if it was possible to create them with our collaborators physically, if they could create those proteins, how they would behave. So I started supporting that. So we started doing molecular dynamics on folding proteins and trying to create nanorobots. Those were like early days of nanotechnology, and several organizations like NASA were interested in that kind of work. I'm happy to see that, we do hear from time to time other researchers still doing that. They're still creating nanorobots that are going into bloodstream and performing tasks. So that was my initial kind of exposure and contribution to cutting edge research. After I completed my PhD, I also wanted to do something which is, applicable in the next 5, 10, 20 years, not 50 years. And I got this opportunity to apply my computational modeling and simulation techniques to a different system, from a molecular level system where we would look at atomic scale. I got to work on a particle level where your particles were in micrometer sizes and up to millimeter sizes. So I started looking at powder handling processes, mixing of powders, compaction of powders, and how they behave in different unit operations. And that's how I entered the pharmaceutical world. Powders tend to be more complex than we believe they are. And there's multiple reasons why they are so, but it is extremely important that we know how to handle them, how to store them, and how to work with them. Because more than 85% of drug products that are consumed are in the form of tablets. So they remain one of the most important areas of manufacturing, research, and development. So I entered the pharmaceutical world from that angle, modeling of materials, of granular materials. I worked for a few years, and that is how I kind of got into it. I went to India after a few years of research. I initially wanted to be in academia and carry forward this research. So I initially started working as a professor. Did not quite enjoy the early months of it, and I found another opportunity to kind of consult with various industries and apply the same modeling technologies to help them with their processes. So I actually did a bit of business development that it was a humbling experience and a learning experience because I had the mindset of a scientist, of a researcher, and people also build you up because you have expertise, you are some core expert in this area and that area. And then you're suddenly sitting and picking up a phone and making a cold call to try to sell something. So that was a mindset change. And it's also humbling, but I needed to do that. So you got to do what you got to do type of thing. So I had to build my own team in a small company, unknown for this area, try to build a new vertical in their business. And so we did that for a few years. Then I got another opportunity in India to help a larger business conglomerate improve their processes at a large scale. You're talking about manufacturing cement in tons, not in grams. So I got an opportunity to apply my skills there. And then eventually USP happened, and I have been with USP for over 7 years now. Now I do not do hardcore, modeling and simulation and process development, but I do look at the processes from a higher up scale, I guess 30,000 feet. Mm-hmm. I look at where the industry is going, and I try to put forward best practices.
That's an absolutely amazing journey from going into a separate industry as a whole and then transitioning into pharma. It's very, very profound, and you can see how certain skills are very translatable from field to field, especially when it comes to production. But one thing I was curious about while you were answering the question was, why do the MBA? What did the MBA unlock for you that you couldn't get through experience alone?
Yeah. Sorry, I completely forgot about that part of the question. The idea of MBA had been in my mind ever since, like I said, I had to build this little team, build a business vertical in a small consulting company, and kind of train myself into business building, which I was completely not trained in, not academically, not from an attitude um, perspective either. And so the idea came to my mind in around that time. That was about 2014, 2015. But it just lingered on, and the right opportunity never came. Until about in 2019, when I was exploring my company. USP is wonderful in a sense that it allows for staff to have growth opportunity. They would even cover part of your tuition and so on. So I started looking at these opportunities, and I came across this wonderful program offered by the Geese College of Business at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. It was completely virtual, so I could do things remotely without actually having to give up my work. And they offered the same quality of education at a fraction of the price. So all of those things got together. I got into the program, and I had to put in a lot of work in the next 2.5 years to get through all of that coursework, and the experience was wonderful. So what I think MBA does is that it opens up your mind into thinking in ways you never really thought things could happen. If you're a highly technical person, if you're a scientist, you have a certain way of thinking. Oftentimes they call us, a person who goes into the weeds, down into the details, and you want to know everything. But MBA also tells you that, the bigger picture is important. So you no longer are unaware of what a balance sheet is, what a business model is, why management may be taking certain decisions which you don't understand as an employee. Why are they saying that? Why are they taking those decisions, and so on and so forth? So this MBA gave me a really good picture of what's happening in the CEO level, what's happening in the C-suite, and how it relates. What is my role in this organization, and how can I contribute? So I think that's valuable knowledge. And aside from that, it gives you this ability to look into sources of knowledge, literature, which are aside from your scientific and technical literature. You can read, you can learn, there's so much information available these days, whether it is LinkedIn or YouTube or everywhere. So it just opens your mind up to different things.
Absolutely. Love your thoughts on going into the weeds versus looking at the bigger picture. And that is very true, especially because during my undergrad too, I'm doing biopharmaceutical science and a business finance minor as well. So I really see the difference in the two worlds, but also so much coming together when you mix the two. And the understanding of the science and the business makes you a much better asset to a company, I'm sure. But now looking more towards your grad school or in grad school, right? Students often optimize for publications or prestige when they want to go into industry. So looking back, what should students optimize for if they want a high impact career in pharma manufacturing?
I think you're just going to be honest with yourself. That's the fundamental thing. And that works in grad school, but it works everywhere, even in high school. Because there's so many other things that are going on in this world today. In our days, it was much less so, but today, the number of distractions you have, whether they are, they can be good distractions too, but they're still distractions. You can be distracted by AI. You can be distracted by prompt engineering stuff. You may be learning stuff, but, you are still distracted. There is a lot of things going on. So today, I think it's super important for a learner to know how they can create their space, how they can lock in for a certain period. Short period, not for too long, but lock in. We used to lock in only when we needed to do big homeworks, for example, or you had an exam. But it's super important that you figure out a way to lock in for some hours in a day. And try not to focus on publications because they come in a heap later. And that's what my experience was. In my postdoc, I had no publications in the first 3 years because I kind of switched my domains. But suddenly I just started publishing after 2010 in a big way. So if you're honest with yourself and you try to figure out how much you want to learn a certain domain, there is a lot of positive information available in this world of internet that you can learn a lot about your domain. So focus on learning the fundamentals. Focus on what's going on in the world in your field. And then you have the brain power to synthesize the two together and actually create something new. And that is when your publications are going to come.
That is absolutely amazing advice. And following up with that, so if you could reflect and tell us what is one decision you made early in your career that either made or broke your career in a way? Like, what was that one important decision you made early in your career that eventually was really impactful and compounded really well?
It was about being open to new things which I had no idea about. Say, for example, when I first joined my mechanical engineering master's, coming from India, and this is early part of this century, right? This is very early, 2001, literally. Yeah. And so I came with my traditional ideas that I'm gonna want to work on fast cars, robots, those kinds of stuff. And then when I get here and I look at the research that is going on, it is a completely different world. People are talking biomechanics, mechanics of the heart, bone mechanics and stuff like that. So your old robotics is done with. The research is already done. It is about applying it and creating something useful. So the one thing that I did was I took a risk when I was looking for advisors. So instead of going with someone who was working on the traditional technologies, I talked to this person, Professor Mavroidis, and he said, you can work in traditional robotics and work on revolute joints and spherical joints and things like that. But you know what? I also did the same in my postdoc. Or you can work on nano robots. I have no idea how they work and how they would work, but it should be biomimetic and you'll have to do a lot of learning yourself. I will connect you with somebody who knows about it, but you have to build and develop this project. So that was a huge risk at that time. And I guess young blood, I just took the risk. I really didn't think much about it. But now I think back to it, not many of my students, co-students did that, and I did that. So I have a different trajectory. It has been fun. It has been challenging, but it has been fun. But I was open to going into the biochemistry department and taking a class over there, trying to learn about biomimetic systems and then molecular dynamics, things that are never a part of a many mechanical engineering curriculum. So
Right.
going from engine cycles, Carnot cycles, and heat pumps to molecular dynamics of hydrogen atoms and oxygen atoms. It was a big change, and it was a risk, but I'm glad I took it because what it taught me about myself was, the human brain is able to learn. You just have to remain open to learn.
Yeah, that is a very interesting story, especially because you see it now too, where, even for research opportunities, there's so many different labs that provide opportunities. It's a student's choice on which lab you want to go into, what excites you, what challenges you, as you said. So what lesson I collected from your answer there was just challenge yourself early in your career and it could potentially compound into a great trajectory. Maybe one that's not too common, but one that's rewarding in a way. So, absolutely love that answer. And now going more into recruiting, for your team specifically, even at USP, I'm sure you must have had to recruit in some form of way or must be recruiting. So, when you're picking for a candidate, what is the difference you see between a candidate who know the theory versus a candidate who you trust on a real plant problem at 2 a.m. or a person you could trust to douse a fire if there ever is one?
It depends on the way they handle themselves, the way they talk about any past challenges they may have faced, and how they went about it. So you look for clues in certain sentences. I'll give you an example of one candidate. We asked, where do you see yourself 5 years from today? And she said, probably married and with children somewhere. And we were very confused that we were talking about work, and we wanted to hear how she looked at herself growing into the organization and what role she could be playing. And she chose to answer in a different way. And regardless, to say that we did not go ahead with that candidate. So it's about how you think about situations. It's about how you describe, even if you're describing a situation, sometimes the exact situation may not have happened in your life. And that's a big question. And the interviewer says, tell me about a time when you wanted to do this and management did not approve of it. How did you go about talking? So the exact situation may or may not have happened to you, but you can still think that it will happen. It will eventually happen to you. How would you go about it? So how would you tell your management that what you're doing is important? So essentially what you need to do is you need to understand what you're doing, how it impacts the team, and how it is going to eventually impact your manager's own evaluation in front of his own superiors. So how are you going to contribute to that? And how this decision that they may take is going to help with that.
I see. That is actually a very common trend I've seen most interviews ask. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? A very simple question, surprisingly very easy to mess up on. And so another question I had a follow-up. What is another favorite interview question you have that most people mess up on or don't really understand what the meaning of that question is, and what's the significance to you as the interviewer?
Well, I mean, it's very hard for me to answer that question because there's not one question. Humans, we bring our messiness with us everywhere we work. And we have to be, as we grow into leadership roles, you have to become comfortable with uncertainty and the messiness. So every individual, especially in multi-ethnic, multicultural organizations that we work in, comes with a different past, different attitude because of their past. And you have to continuously keep learning. It's never on technical questions that a person may mess up, but it is usually on behavioral side of questions. Because if an organization is asking you those, they see from their past experience that they have had misfit candidates potentially. So they want to make sure that the candidate comes with the right attitude. And that attitude can be measured in multiple ways. So they can create a hypothetical situation in front of you and say that, assuming this happened, how would you tackle that? What happens if you are in a team meeting, you are a leader, you're making a presentation, there is a couple of people who never talk. How would you go and engage and make sure that their opinions are also considered in any collective decision? How would you handle a situation when somebody keeps on talking over someone else? So that's another behavioral challenge. So we look for people who are going to become leaders in the future because you don't want to be short-sighted and think of a given plant problem or a given problem in this role. You want to hire somebody for the long run. So you want to have those, I guess skills can be learned, but attitudes are hard to change.
Absolutely. And that is actually very important, the way you show up. Just following up with that, if a student wants to work at a place like USP or at the interface of industry, regulation, and quality, what should they do differently compared to a traditional pharma job search?
Um, you probably you don't do anything different from a technical learning perspective. You're gonna be learning what you're learning. It is more about the attitude because in a traditional pharma industry role, you are talking about how I can optimize my certain manufacturing prowess, whether it is your process development, whether it is manufacturing, towards maximizing profit to my business. While here, there is no such concept of maximizing profit. Here, it is about how much you care about making quality pharmaceuticals available worldwide. So it's more about the mindset than about the hard skills for bodies like ours. I see a lot of people in FDA, for example, they move from industry into the FDA. After a few years of industrial experience, they move into the FDA. And so there's no such skill gap, or you don't need additional skills to work at regulatory bodies or nonprofits like ours. But you do need to have this passion for working for humanity rather than working for profit.
Okay. And in terms of, just following up in terms of outreach, for recruiting, what's a smart outreach message you'd actually respond to if someone reached out to you to apply to USP?
I would like to look at why they want to work at USP. The biggest question is why and how they describe it. Yes, I have done so and so work, I did so and so research, but yes, you can do the same thing in Merck, or you can do the same thing at Pfizer, but why would you want to do that at USP? So what is your driver? So I would want to see in their message that if they have anything that connects, that whether they saw something that USP did in the past, or they have a personal story why USP was found to help, and they may have heard it from somebody, and that motivated them to come contribute to USP and kind of build their career with USP. So I would want to look at that.
So the why is more important, and why specifically USP? Because why do you want to make impact in this organization where you could be contributing to so many others? So that is a very valid question, and I hope it's important, and it's important lesson to our viewers to when they're reaching out to anyone. Actually, as a matter of fact, why this specific person when you could be reaching out to anyone. So now, sort of moving tracks into more of the future of the industry itself. I remember in the beginning of the episode we brought up nutraceutical products, supplements. There has been a big push, or at least currently in the industry, nutraceuticals are not as heavily regulated as pharmaceuticals, and it is a well known fact. But I believe people are pushing towards more regulations in nutraceutical quality. So, what are your thoughts on that as being at the forefront of standardization?
Now, whether a certain nutraceutical should or should not be regulated is a decision that is best left on that particular case, depending on the impact. What is the biological impact of it? What is the social impact of it? And so those decisions are taken usually by regulatory bodies. Regulations as such don't necessarily, or standards don't necessarily have to mean that you're stifling innovation. In fact, they can support. In a day-to-day world, let's say Bluetooth. We all use Bluetooth headsets and other devices. You're using one right now. Why does your Bluetooth headset work here in US? And it will also work if you go to Japan. It will also work if you go to Thailand or wherever. That is because Bluetooth is a standard. Somebody put in years worth of effort, and there was actually an industry as well as regulatory body collaboration that created a Bluetooth standard, the USB standard. So all of those have actually made life easier for a lot of other manufacturers who are creating these Bluetooth devices and USB devices. We saw a push for standardization in the charging standards for electric vehicles. So now we have a North American charging standard. So standards make it easier for a lot of other manufacturers to come in and then build off of them and create innovative products. So if the regulation is deemed that if a certain nutraceutical is necessary to be regulated, then it should be regulated. And that's essentially my position. Our job is to make sure that there are standards available for people to make a quality product.
Thank you for making the distinction. It's a very important distinction to make, especially in terms of what USP does as a whole. So now zooming out a bit in terms of your personal view, what does the factory of the future look like in pharma over the next 5 to 10 years, and what's real versus what's hype?
Well, hype is also important, I think. Even if it sounds like hype means hypothetical, but no, I mean, you look at the Gartner's hype cycle of anything. It goes up in hype, it goes up in high, and eventually it reaches its peak. Then it goes down, but the adoption also grows with time and technologies mature. So what we are seeing today is that there is an increasing use of process analytical tools in pharmaceutical manufacturing. These tools are able to look at a sample multiple times within a second. So you are not taking sample out and preparing a sample, putting it under a scanner and getting a reading. You have equipment that is focusing beams onto moving material and collecting data multiple times a second. So that completely changes the way you can do your statistics. You're no longer looking at 30 samples. You're looking at 3 million samples maybe in a day that no human ever collected. They were observed, and you had a model that converted that observation into a physically meaningful quantity. And you put it into a statistical program or model that tells you whether the process is in control or it is not in control. So this is happening today. In the future, I expect that there is going to be more and more mechanization like this. Already people are using artificial intelligence and machine learning in manufacturing. It may or may not be at the GMP scale, at the production scale today, but it is definitely there in the process development stages. And eventually that's the natural way things trickle, innovations trickle. They go from this process development stage where the models are considered as only informative. They are not going to impact the quality of the product. They have no impact on the patient, so they have a low impact. But slowly they grow into higher impact models. And eventually the models make the decisions. The next step could be that machines would be talking to each other. So instead of a human trying to create a feed forward or a feedback control and making decisions on turning the knobs, it would be machines that are going through this control loop and making decisions, and a human will eventually have to make sure that the quality of in the pharmaceutical, at least. I don't care what happens in a petrochemical setting. It's only an engine that busts, but here this can be disastrous. So eventually a human will have to make sure that the quality is there. So what all can you do to aid that human in making that decision rapidly is going to be important. And from a manufacturing perspective, yes, we see batch, we see continuous, we see semi-batch, we see semi-continuous, we see mini-batch. Then we see for certain steps, even 3D printing of tablets. And that brings its own sets of variables, its own advantages, and its own challenges. So you could have a process in the future where you are creating API using a synthetic process at a tabletop level of scale, but it could be a manufacturing scale in real world, and feeding that API to a 3D printer that is rapidly printing out tablets. And then once you're done, you can move everything to a new facility in a new geography. So you could literally be democratizing the manufacturing operations instead of having to create these huge factories. Now, from a regulatory perspective, that will bring its own challenges because you need to make sure the raw materials that you're getting at every location is equivalent, that it has been verified. Whatever change, because there's going to be some change in raw material. How do you handle that change? How does your process handle that change? You need to demonstrate that. So essentially, the end goal is going to be always be the same, that the product should be quality and it should be able to reach the patient as soon as possible. But there is so many other variables in the past. So going into the future, I see more and more automation, more and more use of these models. But also the companies will have to learn. You cannot just use ChatGPT for your AI. You need to build your own agentic AI. And you need to know what you fed into it, how that model was trained, and you need to continuously validate the results of that AI model.
I feel like within manufacturing companies soon, AI departments, internal AI departments would become a growing trend because I believe, again, with the pharma industry, there's so much proprietary data that you cannot give over to. Like if you cannot use ChatGPT because ChatGPT trains off of that data. So you don't want to give proprietary data to ChatGPT. So feel like again a very big trend and maybe a big opportunity for people looking into the space to look at departments within the company that have specific utility for AI. And so my final question to you is, looking ahead, what role do you personally want to play in the next chapter of pharma manufacturing, and what problem do you feel pulled to solve?
Yeah, before I go to that, again, something you said that flagged something into my mind. AI department. So one thing I learned as a part of my MBA, especially when we focused on innovation, one thing I learned about innovation and creativity is that companies that create a division for innovation or department for innovation end up failing. It doesn't work. Innovation is not the responsibility of a particular division or department in your company. Innovation has to be company wide, from the basic operator level to the CEO level. It's everybody's responsibility. The same thing goes for the AI. You cannot have an AI department. The AI should naturally progress, just like every other skill in the past, down into the employee population. And you want to have employees interested in learning it. You want to make sure that you provide opportunity and right kind of training, because everybody needs to know it. Otherwise, someone is going to take a misstep that can be costly. Now, the role which I foresee myself playing is that exactly what I am doing right now. What I'm trying to do right now is to democratize knowledge. What we have seen is that, the bigger companies have the resources to hire fresh PhDs and postdocs. They come in with the very latest and the greatest, the right attitude and the technical knowledge. But think about it. About 90% of the prescriptions that are consumed are made by generics manufacturers. They are not made by the big pharma. And a lot of these manufacturers are in different parts of the world. They do not have access to this kind of trained workforce. They may not even have the time to try and read hundreds of research papers and try to synthesize something for their own. That is what motivates us to try and do that for them and try to advance the process, advance the science in this way. So that's why I write technical guides, and I hope that they are helpful. They are being downloaded in almost 40 countries with interest. So I am hoping that they are helpful. What motivated what created that idea in our minds was that when I was working for the ICH Q13 guidance, we saw that we were very, very brief, always to the point, and tried to be non-prescriptive. But companies and stakeholders we talked to, they said that, we need a little bit more. We need more details about how to go about this, even though you may not be prescriptive about it. So that is how we went, one step at a time into each technical guide to try to detail every step. And so that's what I am doing right now. And I see my role in the future as to build more people. I see myself as someone who loves to teach. I guess my first real job was a professor, and I continue to do that. So I hope to continue to build people, try to put this into their minds that, whatever they're doing is not just for the next paycheck, not just for their families. It is something that they are doing as a whole for all of us, for all of our coming generations. So I hope to do that in many ways.
Absolutely. It's great to see that your core of teaching has never changed and you're still a teacher at heart. And just a follow up to your answer, where can students or individuals in generics manufacturing find the information that you are democratizing? What are the resources you'd recommend and where would they be able to find it?
Yeah, we don't see a lot of them in conferences. In conferences, we go and talk about, we present, we see a lot of people from big companies, but it's just not economically feasible at times. Even for people in big companies nowadays, it's not easy to go out to conferences multiple times a year. So we publish our guidances free of cost, the technical guides. We have them available on our website. People can easily reach out to me by LinkedIn if they are not able to find it. And they are free downloads. That is our service to the manufacturing community.
Absolutely. And it's a very important service because you're the foundation that the industry sort of stands on. So it's very important and it's really important work that you do. And we really appreciate it as the industry. And again, as from the students listening to this episode, I'd like to thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the valuable information and really giving us a new perspective to the industry because I know manufacturing is not too talked about when you're learning about the industry in and of itself in the beginning. So again, thank you for coming on, giving us some of your time, and yeah, I hope the students got a lot out of this. Thank you.
I hope so too. I wish them all the best of luck, and I hope that you will continue to carry on doing good work and serve humanity as a part of your career.